every single day. Roughly 21 million barrels of oil pass through a strip of water no wider than 33 kilometers at its narrowest point. That is approximately 20% of the world's entire petroleum liquids supply moving through a single choke point. One that Iran has explicitly threatened to close, one that has been mine-blockaded and fought over for decades. Now, a coalition of Gulf states, backed by sovereign wealth funds and international energy capital, is preparing to spend upward of $100 billion to make that choke point irrelevant. This is not a contingency plan. This is not a diplomatic talking point. This is an infrastructure offensive, and if it succeeds, it will permanently redraw the map of global energy power. Today, on the Power Shift Reports, we break down exactly what this plan involves, who is funding it, what it means for Iran, and why the consequences will be felt far beyond the Persian Gulf in oil markets, in Washington, in Beijing, and in the corridors of OPEC. Let's get into the report. To understand why $100 billion is being mobilized, you first need to understand the strategic weight of the Strait of Hormuz. The strait sits between Oman and Iran, connecting the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman and, ultimately, the Arabian Sea. It is the mandatory transit route for oil and LNG exports from Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Iraq, and Qatar, 5 of the world's top 10 oil exporters. In 2023 alone, an estimated 21 million barrels per day of crude oil, condensates and petroleum products move through this corridor. Qatar's LNG exports, which supply Europe with a critical energy lifeline, also depend entirely on this passage. The strategic leverage this gives Iran is extraordinary. Tehran does not need to defeat the United States Navy in open combat to cause a global energy crisis. It simply needs to credibly threaten the strait long enough to spike oil prices, destabilize importing economies, and extract political concessions. Iran has done exactly that repeatedly. In 2019, following US sanctions under the Maximum Pressure Campaign, Iran seized tankers, attacked vessels, and struck Saudi oil infrastructure at Abqaiq and Khoreh, temporarily cutting Saudi production by 5%. Oil prices jumped 15% in a single trading session. The vulnerability is structural, and the Gulf states have decided they are no longer willing to accept it. The $100 billion bypass strategy is not a single project. It is a coordinated infrastructure corridor consisting of multiple complementary pipelines, port expansions, and maritime route developments, designed collectively to create a viable alternative to Hormuz. The key components are as follows. First, the UAE's Abu Dhabi crude oil pipeline, or ADCOP. This is the most mature element of the bypass architecture. Already operational since 2012, the ADCOP runs 380 kilometers from Habjan. It reaches the port of Fujairah on the Gulf of Oman, entirely bypassing the strait. Current capacity sits at 1.5 million barrels per day. Expansion projects are underway to push that figure toward 2 million. Fujairah itself is being transformed. It is now the world's second-largest bunkering hub after Singapore. Abu Dhabi is investing billions to turn it into a full-spectrum export terminal. The terminal will be capable of handling very large crude carriers at scale. Second, Saudi Arabia's east-west pipeline, known as the Petrolini. This 1,200-kilometer pipeline connects Saudi Arabia's eastern province oil fields to the Red Sea port of Yanbu at peak capacity. It can move 5 million barrels per day, entirely bypassing the Gulf. Saudi Aramco has recently announced capital allocation for significant capacity upgrades and modernization of the Yanbu terminal infrastructure. Third, the Oman pipeline corridor. This is the most ambitious and least reported element of the plan. Oman sits entirely outside the Persian Gulf and has direct Indian Ocean access, positioning itself as the corridor nation. The network would carry Iraqi, Kuwaiti, and potentially Qatari hydrocarbons south through Omani territory to deep-water terminals. Negotiations over a Kuwait-Oman pipeline have been ongoing, with reported investment commitments exceeding $12 billion for the first phase. Fourth, Qatar's LNG diversification. Qatar is constructing new liquefaction trains under its North Field expansion. This is a $28.75 billion project, negotiating long-term supply agreements that route LNG cargoes through non-Hormuz maritime corridors. When you aggregate the capital expenditure across all 4 nodes, total investment is between $90 billion and $120 billion. This is where the analysis becomes strategically consequential. If this infrastructure reaches full capacity by 2032, the Strait of Hormuz loses its status as an absolute choke point. What does that mean for Iran? Tehran's primary source of regional leverage, the ability to threaten energy disruption, is substantially degraded. Iran's negotiating position in nuclear talks and proxy conflict management is currently underwritten by the implicit threat to global oil supply. Remove that threat credibly, and Iran's coercive toolkit shrinks considerably. This is not lost on Tehran. Iranian officials have responded to bypass infrastructure developments with a combination of diplomatic pressure on Oman and covert support for regional instability. They have also accelerated drone and missile program development targeting pipeline infrastructure, a subject we will return to later. For Saudi Arabia and the UAE, energy infrastructure sovereignty translates directly into geopolitical sovereignty. The ability to export hydrocarbons independently of Iranian goodwill fundamentally strengthens their strategic autonomy. This allows them to coordinate more confidently with Washington and negotiate from positions of strength with major importers like China, India, and Japan. In the immediate term, the existence of credible bypass capacity functions as a risk premium suppressor. When energy traders priced Iranian escalation risk, the availability of alternative export routes limits the upside scenario. A fully operational network could reduce the risk premium by $5 to $8 per barrel. According to Goldman Sachs modeling, China is the world's largest oil importer, and approximately 40% of its crude supply transits the Strait of Hormuz. Beijing has made calculated investments in the Omani Special Economic Zone at Duqm and in the UAE's Khalifa port. China's interest is not ideological, it is supply chain insurance. They want optionality regardless of who controls the regional security. The United States views this infrastructure favorably as a mechanism to reduce allied vulnerability to Iranian coercion. No analysis is complete without assessing the obstacles. The multi-nation corridor requires sustained political alignment between competing states. States have diverged significantly on Yemen policy, OPEC plus production strategy, and commercial competition in the post-petroleum economic diversification space. Iraq remains politically fractured, with Iranian-aligned factions within its government structurally opposed to any infrastructure that reduces Tehran's leverage. Getting these actors to coordinate capital timelines and operational protocols over a decade-long build cycle is a significant governance challenge. Technical and environmental complexity. The proposed Oman corridor traverses some of the most geologically and climatically challenging terrain in the Arabian Peninsula. The Fujairah Mountains, extreme heat, and seismic activity create engineering constraints that inflate costs and extend timelines. Environmental impact concerns, particularly around groundwater and coastal marine ecosystems, are also emerging as regulatory friction points. The sabotage variable. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has demonstrated both the capability and the willingness to strike energy infrastructure with precision. The 2019 Abqaiq attack was a proof of concept. A long-distance pipeline is a harder target, but terminal infrastructure remains exposed. Any bypass system will require a parallel security investment in missile defense, hardened facilities, and intelligence coordination. At $100 billion across a decade, this program is sensitive to the global interest rate environment and oil price cycles. A sustained period of low oil prices could compress the capital budgets of Gulf sovereign funds precisely when project financing is needed most. The $100 billion bypass plan is the most significant structural challenge to Iran's regional leverage in modern history. It is an infrastructure campaign. If completed, it will permanently alter the risk architecture of global energy markets and redistribute strategic influence toward Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, and Muscat. It will not eliminate the Strait of Hormuz as a relevant waterway, but it will eliminate Hormuz as an irreplaceable one. And in geopolitics, the difference between irreplaceable and merely important is the difference between leverage and vulnerability. The Gulf states have decided they are done being vulnerable. Whether the construction timelines survive reality will define the next decade. No serious geopolitical analysis survives without stress testing the assumptions. This plan, ambitious as it is, carries 4 distinct categories of structural risk. Political fragmentation, the alliance problem. The multi-nation corridor concept requires sustained political alignment between states that have demonstrably competing interests. Saudi Arabia and the UAE, pillars of GCC cohesion, have divergent policies on Yemen and OPEC production strategy that have exposed significant fault lines. Both nations are competing for the same international capital and regional hub status, with Dubai and Riyadh locked in a direct commercial rivalry. Now at Iraq, Iranian-aligned factions within Iraq are structurally opposed to any project that reduces Tehran's regional leverage, making every pipeline a political battlefield. Qatar adds further complexity. Doha maintains an independent foreign policy, balancing relations with Iran and Turkey while deepening its U.S. defense partnership. Technical and environmental complexity, the engineering frontier. Moving hydrocarbons through Saudi territory into Oman requires crossing some of the most extreme terrain on Earth. The Fujairah mountain range presents serious geological challenges. Sustained surface temperatures exceeding 50 degrees Celsius degrade equipment and compress working hours for construction. Indian Ocean deepwater terminal development requires massive marine infrastructure. Environmental scrutiny regarding dredging and spill risks further extends timelines and inflates costs. The sabotage variable, Iran's asymmetric counter. This is the risk that strategic planners most actively weigh as a threat to infrastructure viability. The 2019 strikes on Saudi Aramco's Abqaiq facility showed that precision drone attacks could temporarily eliminate 5% of global oil supply. A bypass pipeline cannot be interdicted at one location, but it also cannot be defended at every location simultaneously against loitering munitions. Any serious program must include substantial investment in layered air defense and hardened infrastructure. meaning the real cost is likely much higher. The financialization risk, a $100 billion program, is exposed to global financial cycles, and Gulf sovereign wealth funds are not immune to volatility. In a capital-constrained environment, bypass infrastructure must compete with gigaprojects like NEAM that carry significant domestic, political, and prestige weight. So where does this leave us? This plan represents a deliberate, coordinated effort by the Gulf states to purchase strategic sovereignty. They are attempting to sever the structural dependency on the Strait of Hormuz through the permanent physical reconfiguration of how resources reach markets. This is infrastructure as geopolitical strategy. When nations invest at this scale in structural independence, the effects are generational. If this bypass reaches full capacity by 2030, the strategic mathematics for Iran change. Their deterrent threat to global energy supply is structurally diminished. For global energy markets, the result is a compression of the geopolitical risk premium, leading to more stable baseline costs for major economies. The Strait of Hormuz will not become irrelevant, but there is a massive difference between a choke point that is irreplaceable and one that is merely significant. The Gulf states have made their calculation. They are done being vulnerable. The Strait's days as the single lever of regional power are genuinely numbered.